Garlic hitting olive oil in a cold water flat, the sound of a wooden spoon scraping the bottom of a pot that held maybe $1 worth of food. The whole building knew what was cooking. 3 floors, 4 families, 1 smell. Somebody figured out how to turn almost nothing into a meal that could hold a man together for a 12-hour shift. 3 ingredients, sometimes 2. But when did we decide that wasn't enough? When did simple become something to be embarrassed by? 25 of those meals are still waiting. This is where we start. Number 25, Aglio e olio, garlic, olive oil, dried spaghetti. That is the entire recipe. There is no secret. There is no technique that requires culinary school. A woman in a tenement kitchen on Mulberry Street in 1923 could make this in the time it took the pasta water to boil, and she did, 3 or 4 nights a week, because those 3 ingredients were the only ones that never ran out. The garlic went into the oil before the oil got too hot. The pasta came out of the water a minute early and finished in the pan. The starch from the cooking water married the oil into something that clung to every strand. That was dinner. That was also lunch the next day, if there was any left, eaten cold, standing up before a shift at the docks. Today, you can find Aglio e olio on restaurant menus for $14 a plate. In 1923, the whole pot cost less than a nickel. The recipe did not change, only the price did. Number 24, pane cotto. Cooked bread, stale bread torn into pieces, dropped into boiling water with a clove of garlic and whatever fat was available. Olive oil if things were good, lard if things were not. The bread swelled and softened and became something closer to porridge than soup, and it sat in the stomach like a stone, which was the entire point. A loaf of Italian bread cost 2 cents in 1920. When that loaf went stale, it did not go in the trash. Trash was a luxury. The bread went into the pot, and the pot fed a family of 5. And nobody called it a recipe because it did not feel like one. It felt like making do. But making do kept children alive through winters that killed. Number 23, eggs in purgatory, uova in purgatorio. Canned tomatoes in a skillet, a pinch of salt, and eggs cracked directly into the sauce. The eggs poached in the tomato while the bread toasted on the stovetop beside them. 2 eggs, a can of tomatoes, bread from yesterday. That was breakfast, lunch or dinner, depending on when the hunger hit. The name came from the way the egg sat suspended in the red sauce, caught between done and not done, between solid and liquid. Purgatory, somewhere in between. The theology was accidental, but the accuracy was not. Most of these families lived somewhere in between too, between the old country and the new one, between surviving and something that might, on a good week, look like living. Number 22. Pasta al pomodoro. Pasta, canned San Marzano tomatoes, salt. Some families added a clove of garlic, some did not. The argument about whether garlic belongs in a simple tomato sauce has been running for 100 years and will outlast everyone reading this. What matters is that a mother could open a can of tomatoes she had put up herself the previous August, cook it down in 15 minutes with a pinch of salt, and pour it over whatever dried pasta was in the cupboard. The meal cost almost nothing. It tasted like the garden in Campania she had not seen since 1904. Every time she made it, she was cooking 2 meals at once. One for the family in front of her, one for the family she left behind. Number 21, bread and sugar. A slice of Italian bread, a thin layer of butter or lard, and white sugar sprinkled on top. This was a snack. This was an after-school meal. This was what a grandmother handed a child when the child was crying and the cupboard had nothing else in it. It sounds like poverty, and it was poverty, but it also tasted like something a child would remember 60 years later and describe to their own grandchildren with a tenderness that does not match the ingredients. The bread was cheap, the sugar was cheap, the memory was not. Number 20, frittata di pasta. Leftover cooked pasta, eggs, and a pinch of salt fried in a skillet until the bottom turned golden and the top set firm. the Neapolitan answer to what happens when you have last night's spaghetti and 2 eggs and nothing else. This was not a frittata in the way a brunch restaurant uses the word. There were no asparagus tips. There were no imported cheeses. There was cold pasta and eggs and a cast iron pan that weighed more than the youngest child. And the whole thing came together in 8 minutes while that child screamed and the older ones fought over who set the table. Italian cooking was not peaceful. It was fast, loud, and built on whatever was left. Number 19. Lentil soup. Dried lentils, water, salt. A bay leaf if there was one. The lentils cooked in about 30 minutes, which made them faster than any other dried legume, and a pound of dried lentils cost almost nothing and expanded into enough food for 2 days. On New Year's Day, lentils were eaten for luck because their shape resembled coins. The rest of the year, they were eaten because they were cheap. A father coming home from a 12-hour shift in a factory in Newark or Trenton or Providence would sit at the kitchen table and eat 2 bowls of lentil soup without saying a word. The soup did not need to be beautiful. It needed to be hot, and it needed to be ready, and it needed to fill the silence between the end of one shift and the beginning of the next. Number 18. Bruschetta. Before it became an appetizer at chain restaurants topped with balsamic glaze and microgreens, bruschetta was a piece of stale bread rubbed with a raw garlic clove and drizzled with olive oil. Salt. That was all. The bread had to be toasted first, usually held over a gas flame with bare hands. The garlic melted into the rough surface. The oil soaked into the crumb. The whole thing took 45 seconds. In the Abruzzo region and across most of southern Italy, this was not a starter course. This was the course. This was Tuesday. Number 17, pasta e fagioli, the stripped-down version, not the version with pancetta and carrots and celery that takes 3 hours on a Sunday. The Tuesday version, dried pasta, canned or dried beans, water, salt. Sometimes a spoonful of tomato paste dissolved in the cooking liquid, sometimes not even that. This was the meal that Italian-American families could make when the paycheck had not arrived and the icebox held nothing but a can of cannellini beans someone had put up in September. The pasta and the beans together formed a complete protein, though nobody in 1930 called it that. They called it dinner. A pound of dried beans cost 3 cents. A box of ditalini cost a nickel. The math was simple. The math was the only reason some families survived to February. Number 16. Dandelion greens sautéed with garlic and oil. The greens came from empty lots, from the edges of railroad tracks, from sidewalk cracks in neighborhoods where nothing else grew. A grandmother with a paring knife and a paper bag could forage enough dandelion greens in 20 minutes to feed a family. The greens went into a pan with olive oil and sliced garlic and cooked down to almost nothing, bitter and silky and dark green. The neighbors who were not Italian watched this and thought it was strange. Eating weeds. But the weeds were full of iron and calcium and vitamins that a diet of bread and pasta alone could not provide, and the grandmothers knew this without knowing the science. They knew it the way they knew everything, because their mothers had done it. Number 15, chickpea pasta, pasta e ceci. Dried chickpeas soaked overnight, cooked with a clove of garlic and tossed with short pasta and a spoonful of the starchy cooking liquid. The chickpeas broke down slightly and thickened the broth into something halfway between a soup and a sauce. It clung to the pasta and sat heavy in the chest. In Rome, this was a Friday meal because Friday meant no meat, and chickpeas were the poor family's answer to the church's rules. The church said no meat. The kitchen said fine. The kitchen always found a way. Number 14. Pizza marinara, not margherita, marinara. Dough, crushed tomatoes, garlic, no mozzarella. Mozzarella cost money. This was the pizza that existed before cheese became standard, and in Naples in the 1800s, it was sold from street carts for a price that even a dock worker could afford. When Neapolitan families arrived in New York and Philadelphia and New Haven, they brought this version with them. The pizzerias that would later become famous, the ones that charged by the slice and stayed open until 2 in the morning, many of them started with this exact recipe. Dough, tomatoes, garlic. The cheese came later when the money came. The pizza did not wait for the money. Number 13, egg drop soup, Italian style, stracciatella. Chicken broth, eggs, a handful of grated cheese. The eggs were beaten with the cheese and poured in a thin stream into boiling broth, where they formed ragged ribbons that looked like torn rags. Stracci, rags. The name was honest. This was sick day food. This was what a mother made when a child had a fever and could not keep anything solid down. The broth was warm, the eggs were gentle, and the cheese melted into threads that a child could swallow without chewing. It took 5 minutes. It cost almost nothing. It worked better than most things a doctor could prescribe, and it arrived faster. Number 12, bread crust soup, the crusts cut from loaves. The heels nobody wanted, the dried out ends that sat on the counter for 2 days. All of them went into a pot of boiling water seasoned with salt and a crushed clove of garlic, and they simmered until the crusts broke apart into a thick, starchy mush. This was not a meal anyone chose. This was a meal that chose them. It existed because throwing away bread was a sin, not a metaphorical sin, but an actual one. And in households where the grandmother had grown up in a village where bread was blessed before it was broken, the idea of wasting even a crust felt like something that would follow you. So the crusts went into the pot. The pot fed the family. The sin stayed away. If you are watching this and these meals are bringing back memories, hit subscribe. We cover forgotten food history every week, and the comment section on these videos has become its own archive of family recipes. But the meals on this list are about to get quieter. Number 11, peppers and eggs. Green Italian frying peppers, eggs, salt. Fried in olive oil in a cast iron skillet and eaten on a piece of bread as a sandwich, or eaten straight from the pan with a fork. In South Philadelphia, in Federal Hill, in the north end of Boston, this was a standard Friday lunch during Lent. No meat, the church said. The kitchen answered with peppers and eggs and did not argue. The peppers came from backyard gardens that Italian families planted in every inch of available soil. Tomatoes, peppers, basil, zucchini. The garden was not decorative. The garden was the second income, the one that did not show up on a pay stub but showed up on the table every night from June through October. Number 10, polenta, cornmeal, water, salt, stirred in a pot for 40 minutes until it thickened into a dense golden mass that could be sliced, fried, baked, or eaten soft with a spoon. In northern Italy, polenta was the foundation of nearly every meal for families who could not afford wheat flour. In the Veneto, in Friuli, in the mountains of Trentino, there were families who ate polenta 3 times a day for years. The constant stirring was the price. Someone had to stand over that pot for 40 minutes and keep the wooden spoon moving, or the cornmeal would seize and burn. Usually it was the oldest daughter. Usually she had somewhere else to be. The polenta did not care. It demanded the time, and the family gave it, because the alternative was an empty table. Number 9, potato and egg frittata. Potatoes, eggs, salt. The potatoes were sliced thin and fried until golden. Then the beaten eggs were poured over them, and the whole thing cooked on low heat until it set, flipped once onto a plate, and slid back into the pan to finish the other side. This was a meal that could come together in 15 minutes and feed 4 people for under a dime. The potatoes provided the weight, the eggs provided the protein, the salt provided the illusion that something more complicated had happened, and sometimes the illusion was enough. Number 8, sugar and bread with coffee, a cup of black coffee, a piece of bread dipped into it, a spoonful of sugar stirred into the cup to cut the bitterness. This was breakfast for millions of Italian-American men from the 1900s through the 1950s. Not because they preferred it, because the coffee was a penny, the bread was already on the counter, and the shift at the factory or the rail yard or the construction site started in 20 minutes. A man ate this standing up. He ate it alone, before the rest of the house woke up. He ate it in the dark. This was not a meal anyone photographs. Nobody wrote it down. Number 7. Citrus peel candy. The peels of oranges or lemons, the part that everyone else threw away, simmered in water and sugar until they turned translucent and soft and sweet, rolled in more sugar and set on a sheet of wax paper to dry. This was candy. This was dessert. This was what a grandmother made from garbage. The orange itself had been eaten or squeezed for juice. The peel was the leftover, but in a household where nothing was waste, the leftover became the treat, and children waited for it the way other children waited for store-bought candy. They did not know the difference, or maybe they did, and they preferred the version that came from their grandmother's hands. Number 6. Spaghetti with butter and cheese. Spaghetti, butter, grated cheese, tossed together while the pasta was still hot enough to melt the butter into the starch and coat every strand in a thin film that tasted richer than it had any right to. In Italy they called it pasta in bianco, white pasta, plain pasta, the pasta you made when there was truly nothing else. And yet, 50 years later, a woman in her 70s will tell you that this was the best thing she ever ate. Not the lobster at her anniversary dinner, not the cake at her daughter's wedding. The spaghetti with butter and cheese her mother made on a Wednesday night in 1954, when the refrigerator held nothing but a stick of butter and a nub of parmesan wrapped in wax paper. Memory does that. It assigns weight where none was intended. Number 5. Pane cotto with egg. Stale bread soaked in boiling water, mashed with a fork, and enriched with a single beaten egg stirred into the hot mass. Salt. Nothing else. The egg turned the bread porridge into something slightly more substantial, slightly more golden, slightly more like a meal, and less like an apology. In the mountains of Basilicata and Calabria, where poverty was not a phase but a geography, pane cotto was standard winter breakfast. The bread was hard. The water was from the well. The egg was from the one hen the family kept in the yard. 3 ingredients, 3 sauces, and together they held a body together until midday, which was all anyone asked. Number 4. Pasta with garlic, oil and hot pepper. Aglio, olio e peperoncino. The spicier sibling of number 25. Same base of garlic and olive oil, but with the addition of dried red chili flakes that turned the whole dish into something that burned on the way down and warmed from the inside. In the south, where the peppers grew wild and dried on strings hung from kitchen windows, the heat was not optional. The heat was the point. This was the meal a young man cooked for himself at midnight after coming home late, when everyone else was asleep and the kitchen was dark and the only light came from the blue ring of the gas burner. 3 ingredients, 5 minutes, a full stomach, and enough warmth to fall asleep in a cold apartment. It was not love, but it was close enough. Number 3. Water soup, aqua cotta. Water, stale bread, whatever single vegetable was available. An onion, a tomato, sometimes just garlic. The water was the soup. The bread thickened it. The vegetable, singular, gave it flavor. This was the meal that Tuscan charcoal burners ate in the forests where they worked for weeks without coming home. It was the meal that mothers made when the cupboard held nothing but a half onion and the bread from 3 days ago. It was the meal you did not talk about later, because later, when things got better, you wanted to forget that there had ever been a night when water and bread was all there was. But it fed them. The water held the bread, and the bread held the body, and the body went back to work the next morning. Number 2. Coffee and stale bread for children. A cup of warm milk with a spoonful of coffee stirred in, and stale bread torn into pieces and dropped into the cup to soften. This was breakfast for children. The coffee was barely coffee, more milk than anything else, but it made a child feel grown, and the bread soaked in the warm liquid became soft enough for small teeth. A mother made this while the house was still dark. She made it before she made anything for herself. She stood at the stove in a kitchen the size of a closet and heated the milk and broke the bread and poured the coffee and set the cup on the table and waited. She ate after, if she ate. Number 1, whatever she made from nothing. This is not a single recipe. This is every recipe. This is the meal that does not have a name because it changed every time depending on what was left. A handful of flour, an egg, a pinch of salt became pasta. A crust of bread, a clove of garlic, and hot water became soup. 2 potatoes and a spoonful of oil became dinner. The hands that made these meals belonged to women whose names most of us never learned. They were not chefs. They did not write cookbooks. They did not have Instagram accounts or cooking shows or restaurant reviews. They had a kitchen, a stove, and a family that needed to eat, and they figured it out every single night for decades. We call these 3-ingredient meals because that is the format of this list, but the real ingredient was always the 27th thing, the one that does not fit in a recipe. The knowledge passed hand to hand across a kitchen, across an ocean, across a century. The muscle memory of a pinch, the sound a sauce makes when it is done. The look on a child's face that tells you the food is good before the child says a word. We forgot 25 meals on this list, but we did not forget them because they were not worth remembering. We forgot them because abundance made us careless. Because convenience told us that faster was better, because somewhere along the way a generation decided that 3 ingredients was not enough, when 3 ingredients had been more than enough for 100 years. So I want to know, which of these meals do you remember? Which one did your grandmother make? Which one did you eat standing up in a kitchen that smelled like garlic and coffee and soap? And which one have you been carrying in your memory like a stone in your pocket, smooth from years of turning it over? Tell me in the comments, because some of these recipes only survive there now. My money is on the spaghetti with butter and cheese. It always was.